Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with New Orleans jazz piano legend Henry Butler. During a candid and honest interview with Neon Jazz, Henry went over the annals of a very well-played career that is full of stories and cool insights. From the heart of New Orleans and pulsing with the sound that is all his own, he talked about how things are going these days, some of the finest memories over the years, who has taught him the most, and his love of photography. Please dig this interview, my friends.
Yeah, hey, Henry.
Joe, how are you?
Hey, man, I'm good. Hey, thank you for taking some time to talk with me. I really appreciate it.
Oh, no problem, man.
Well, let's go ahead and start off here, and let's find out what's been going on with you lately.
We're traveling again, and we actually, I was off the scene for a few months because I had some health issues that dictated that I sort of stay around my Denver home, and but it looks like I'm fully recovered from that. And we're back on the scene again, and I don't know if you know, but we also did a record that was released last July.
Okay.
On Impulse, called Universal Impulse, and that was with Steve Bernstein and the Hot Nine, and it's called Viper's Drag.
Okay.
And it's a lovely record. It's with a 10-piece band, and the horn arrangements are by Steve Bernstein. And that's, that's pretty much where we're writing and doing the same thing that most musicians do. We're just signed with the agency, the Maurice Montoya agency. So we'll be back out touring in the fall and next year. Yeah, and that's about it.
Cool, man. Let's get back to the beginning of your life. How influential was it growing up in New Orleans to influence the way that you viewed jazz, life, and just the way you play the piano?
Very good question. Well, New Orleans and its culture was very influential on how I heard music, how I perceived it, how I still to this day interpret certain things in music. New Orleans, probably more than most cities, is a very rhythmic music town. It's probably more African than most cities in this country. It's also probably more French than most other cities in this country. So the music was a lot more syncopated. The food was quite spicy, and so basically we had several uniquenesses that we grew up with and enjoyed while living in New Orleans that I haven't really found in any of the other cities that I've lived in. I mean, you find, little specks of those uniquenesses, but it's just not there. New Orleans, because of its culture, is probably one of 4 or 5 really unique cities in this country, in my opinion. And I would think I would put New York and maybe San Francisco. And I would actually put Kansas City at least until maybe the 40s or 50s in that group of cities.
Yeah.
And there's some Appalachian towns I might put in that group. But because of its rhythm and because of the fact that we had to learn how to play pretty much all styles of music to just stay afloat, that was a big influence on how I do things now, as a matter of fact. When I left New Orleans and went to Michigan to go to grad school, I realized almost instantly that musicians, whether they were good or not, pretty much stayed with one style and developed in one style. It's a little different now because a lot of people everywhere are having play in several styles just to stay afloat.
Sure.
But that New Orleans was big in helping me to create and develop, musically.
So when you were growing up, you started out on the trombone, baritone, horn, and the drums. How did you, evolutionarily speaking, get to the piano, and how has that been your mainstay throughout your career?
Well, the piano was aside from being in glee clubs when I was 6 and 7, piano was the first external instrument that I played, that I started taking lessons on. I started taking lessons on the piano in 3rd grade. I added the drums to that regime in the 4th grade. And in the 5th grade, I actually got a little crash course in arranging and started doing some simple arranging. I stayed with the drums for about 3 years, and then in 7th grade I switched from drums to baritone horn and lower brass, valve trombone. Still had the piano going, and also in 7th grade they gave me a bigger band to arrange for. Had like 5 horns and a drummer, no bass. So that was difficult. But that's where I started making my left hand more active.
Yeah.
Because I was playing all the bass parts, even though I couldn't be heard in those days. But it was fun, and I recognized some of the things that I did in those days in my left hand that inspired a more active left hand use in my work today.
So do you think that made you a more versatile player, someone that could have more range by doing that?
Yes. As a matter of fact, it helped me to become a solo player. A lot of pianists are very good group players, but they don't do much in the way of solo. Charlie Hayden made a statement once when I was playing with him in the 80s. He said, man, I went out and heard this pianist the other night, man, and the first thing I thought of is he needs a bass player.
Yeah.
And a lot of pianists are like that. You know, they have good right hands, but their left hands are just playing chords and maybe occasional bass lines. And I when I teach my students today, one of the things I teach them is that they should not let their left hand, well, they should make their left hand do everything that the right hand does.
Yeah.
And not that should happen all the time in performance, but that will give them a lot more versatility, and they'll be able to compel people to listen a little better.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you were a child, you know, you started playing music at such an early age at 6. Did you always want to grow up to be a musician, or did you have other dreams?
Well, I didn't think I was going to play music as a professional until I got to 5th grade. And once I started arranging, and then once I started realizing the responses that we were getting from all these little girls, I decided that might be some hope for me, you know, in music. So I stayed with it, and it really was cemented when I started arranging in the 7th grade, and even more so when I started playing professionally in the 9th grade. I felt that I could really do this, and I could actually make some decent money with it.
Yeah. So you mentioned teaching as a part of your repertoire, and you've been taught by some greats, Alvin Batiste, Professor Longhair, James Booker, Roland Hanna. Talk to me a little bit about what all of these individuals taught you about not only playing music, but about being alive and being human.
Well, let's start with the being alive and being human, because one of the things I realized almost immediately was every teacher that I've had a unique way of expressing themselves. And it just brings home the fact that no two humans are alike on this planet. It doesn't matter whether two brothers or twin sisters if they go to the same school, if they live in the same house, they're both going to express themselves differently. And when I studied with Alvin, I started working with him when I was about 19. And he, for one guy, it was amazing how he had the whole thing pretty much under his belt. I mean, he was a great classical player, although he didn't pursue that as much as he did his jazz stuff. But very astute composer, arranger. He arranged most of the big band stuff when we played in the big band at Southern University. And he was, because of his arrangements, mostly responsible for us winning first place honors at the festivals that we participated in. But he understood a lot of the, how should I say it? He understood a lot of the idiosyncrasies of various cultures. I mean, he had studied the African cultures, Nigerian, the music of the Ivory Coast, some of the music of Angola, as well as Brazilian music. We worked on music from Panama. He was really adept in all of that. And one of the things that I notice when I visit different schools, even today, most of the jazz teachers are not able to give their students ways to shift from one culture to the next as they're playing. They're not giving them, the simple ways of doing that. And usually most jazz teachers are sticking with, the American jazz styles.
Yeah.
Professor Longhair. I got to study with Professor Longhair because Alvin Baptiste set that up for me. And he was quite interesting for me. I got to study with him after I graduated from Michigan State and gotten my master's in voice. And Professor Longhair was very direct in his instruction, and he knew what he wanted, even though he was not in the sense that we might understand it. He wasn't very well educated. I think he might have gone to the 8th grade in school, but he definitely knew what he wanted. And like he would say something to me like, "Man, you play too hard." And he says, if you didn't play so hard, you might be able to move a little faster. Well, I started working on that then, and I'm still working on it.
Yeah.
So I mean, in some ways, he was more direct than a lot of the college professors that I've worked with. I also studied with George Duke. I studied with George Duke, the late George Duke, when I was just before I entered Michigan State. I graduated from Southern University in Baton Rouge, and then I went to study with George Duke. George was a guy who turned me on to the use of contrary motion, meaning using both hands and doing different things, moving in different directions. And George had just graduated from the conservatory at San Francisco State, so we understood each other very well. And I mean, George was one of those players. He was sort of like me. He could play jazz very well, and he could play and wrote and arranged and produced for other people pop Grammy-winning records.
Yeah.
So it was a joy studying with him. I studied with him when he was with Cannonball Adderley.
Yeah.
And so that was a lot of fun. I got to play a little bit with that group, Nat Adderley and Walter Booker and Roy McCurdy on drums. So that was a lot of fun. And the guy I studied with the next year when I was in my second year of grad school, that summer I studied with Roland Hanna.
Yeah.
And Roland, he certainly wasn't an underrated pianist, but he was an underexposed player. I mean, because he could play his butt off. I mean, he was more narrowly focused than, say, somebody like George Duke. He was more of a bopper, and he would do post-bop stuff or bebop. Great ballad player.
Yeah.
He used to say to me, I like treating the piano like a beautiful woman. I like caressing it. And when I told him that I liked McCoy Tyner, he said to me, he says, well, I can't use that. McCoy beats the piano up. That is what he said. And but I learned a lot from him. As a matter of fact, a lot of my melodic skills come from working with Sir Roland Hanna, the late Sir Roland Hanna. And who else did I study with? Harold Mayburn.
Yeah. I
wanted to study with him because he still is a very percussive pianist. So that was interesting. He gave me some good finger exercises to work with, and I don't know, it was just a joy studying with a good Southern guy who was more percussive than melodic versus, say, somebody like Roland Hanna, who was more melodic, say, than percussive.
Yeah.
And George Duke, who was both.
Yeah.
And then Professor Longhair, who was mostly rhythmic, but in a very different way, in a roots way.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I enjoyed working and studying with all of those people.
So let me ask you this: over your career, you've been all over the place. You've been to almost every festival. You've been over to countries all over the world. What's next for you? What are you looking forward? Any region of the world you're looking forward to seeing? Any other festivals? Are there things on your radar you're looking for?
Well, the first thing I would say to that, I mean, in answering that question, I want to continue putting music out there because it is kind of a service. It's a service that musicians offer to the audiences, and you just hope that you can play something that will be of some benefit to somebody who's listening. One of the things I like doing before any performance is, I go through a little period of meditation where my hope is that I can inspire, inform, encourage, uplift, and to the extent possible, heal. And, if I can do any one or any combination of those things, I'm happy. Now, as far as what's next for me, and I always love going to Europe and Asia. I mean, they listen to the music a little differently, and I suppose that has a lot to do with the educational systems in those countries. They haven't, let's just say they haven't deteriorated nearly as much as our educational system in this country. So we have many people in this country have a harder time listening because they're inundated with things that you might not find yet in some of these other countries that we visit.
Yeah.
There's a lot more people pay more attention to TV here, and it's just different, and back to the educational system, it's definitely it's a sad thing. Excuse me. It's a sad thing to see every year or two how our kids are just not getting much from the schools that they're going to, and especially the public school systems.
Yeah.
So I mean, I don't know. I think jazz musicians are going to have to themselves into a collective, so to speak, to hash out ways of the audience for jazz in this country.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let me ask you this. I'm going to switch tracks just a little bit here. Along with the music, you're an avid photographer. You were a part of an HBO documentary called Dark Light, The Art of Blind Photographers. Talk to me a little bit about how you got into photography and how you get into that.
Well, in 1984, I met a young lady who happened to be an artist, and she had gotten a degree in art history, but she was sort of a painter and did some photography, but she didn't like the idea of selling her art. So in some ways, she was sort of living through me when I decided to be a photographer. The reason why I decided to get into photography is because I was looking for a way to explore and develop my intuitive skills. Now, I was doing that already as a musician, but I wanted to see why other types of artists, why they were interested in doing what they were doing, and what creativity meant to, say, visual artists, as opposed to performing artists. And I also, because being blind, I had really not much of a clue as to what excited visual artists. So that's really the reason why I decided to get into it. When I first started taking pictures, I really was doing it mostly from an intuitive place. I would wait for an urge from within to take the pictures. But then I realized that sometimes that urge might take too long. So I decided that I'd better figure out a better way to do this, at least a better, more of a definite way of taking pictures and sort of being spot on.
Yeah.
So I started hiring assistants who was helping me with all kinds of technical things, like when to use filters and, when to use different lenses and different positions for taking the same picture. Learning about how to deal with the sun, if it's high in the sky, if it's not so high in the sky, if it's overcast. So all kinds of things, and not only that, but changing cameras and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, I got to a point where I started to understand some of the technical things some of the tools that could help photographers and help me in my picture taking. I never tried to develop the pictures, but I learned how to talk to darkroom people, people who developed photographs, and I also learned that you can do almost anything you want with a photograph, with an image. You can do anything you want with any form of art, just like music.
Yeah.
You can turn a musical piece upside down and invert it, and there's just so many things. And you can do the same thing with photography.
Yeah.
So I got a lot of what I was looking for. I will never in this lifetime physically see a picture. I have seen or felt some tactile forms of photographs. And I wasn't really trying to physically see a picture anyway.
Yeah.
I just wanted to understand what composition meant, say, in photography versus music. Possibly what rhythm meant in photography versus music. And as I thought of the different aspects of music, like rhythm and melody and harmony, they all have different meanings in all of the arts.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, intellectually, I got a lot out of being a photographer, and I still get quite a bit out of being a photographer.
Yeah, that's great. Let me ask you this. As a wise and storied man that's been all over the world and played countless gigs, do you have a good story from on the road?
Well, there's a lot of stories,
Yeah.
A lot of stories you can't tell, you can't put in the press. But I would say that, the best stories that I think of usually involve some of the things I've done, like my driving. I was driving on the San Francisco Pier, and I guess the best thing of that is I didn't hit anybody. But that was I drove in a Piedmont, California Independence Day parade once, and I remember when I drove up to the parade site, San Francisco Chronicle was there, and I happened to know some of those people, and I was trying to get them away from me because I didn't want to. we also had in the car that I was driving one of the Piedmont, California employees who we had to pick up before we started the parade route. So I didn't want them talking about my blindness because she didn't know I was blind.
Yeah.
And so I finally got them to leave the car and just watch the parade. So I'm driving, and the owner of the car is telling me, all right, 15 degrees right, 10 degrees left, all right, make a U-turn here. And fortunately, the lady in the back couldn't hear us because the car was pretty big. It was a 1919 Locomobile.
Wow.
It's a real tank of a car.
Yeah.
But anyway, I got through the whole parade, and the only thing that I think probably scared the lady was I did go up onto a curb after the parade, and she decided she needed to get out after that. But so we delivered her safely, and the next day, the San Francisco Chronicle published the fact that I was driving in the Piedmont, California parade, and of course they blasted the car owner. And they told him he would never get a chance to have any of his cars drive in that parade again. I'm sure that's probably scared the lady that was in our car because she had no clue that I was blind.
Yeah. Interesting. That's a great story. I know you're far from being done with your career, but if you had to think right now about your career, how would you like the world of not only jazz, but of music to remember you? What you've given the world with your music?
That's a good question. I was one of the first very versatile musicians to perform in most of the Western styles of music. I was doing it at the point of my first recording, which was released in 1986, and I continue to do that during this day. So I think people will always remember me as a person who could play and did play in all of the Western styles of music, and I never gave up on that, even when the Jazz Police said that I shouldn't be doing that. As a matter of fact, I was blackballed by a couple of guys for a little while, and I guess they took me off the list because we did wind up doing a couple of things at Lincoln Center in the last 5 years. So yeah, I think what I will leave as a legacy is my versatility, and not just, I didn't just play in every style. I played my ass off.
Yeah.
In every style, and I still do, and I still love it. I think people are more into that now than they were, say, in the 80s and, say, early to mid-90s.
That kind of wraps things up, I think, a little bit for me. Henry, it was an honor to speak with you. Thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, man.
And good luck out there, man.
Thank you, Guy.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to yet another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in New York City, Kansas City, and spots all over America, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Henry for his genius, music, photos, and one incredible story. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino on the iTunes Store, or visit theneonjazz.blogspot.com for all things Neon Jazz. Until next time, enjoy the music, my friends.
Neon Jazz.